My name is Max LaPorte. I'm a detective with the Wausau Police Department. The previous stories were officers talking about some pretty critical incidents that affected them. My story is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a couple of smaller things, but it's not really, there's stuff that I've not had a problem with dealing with most of the stuff emotionally, and I'm not really sure why that is, but I call it fortunate, call it not fortunate, but these are my stories. This is Behind the Call. So I've been in law enforcement for 20 years. I started with the Wausau County Sheriff's Department in 2001, right at the end of 2001, and I came to Wausau in 2004. Since I started here, I worked in patrol. I worked in like a grant-funded neighbor-to-neighbor officer position. I was a gang investigation officer, kind of unofficially. I was in our community resource unit working drug investigations primarily, and I've been a detective for the last 4 years or so. I've been through a lot of different calls, a lot of investigations, either directly my investigations or assisting. So many of those investigations just blend into one blob of an investigation that it's hard to pick apart things. But there are always a handful that stick out through 20 years. Sometimes it's because of something that happened that was horrible. Sometimes it was because it was humorous, and unfortunately it's sometimes dark humor that we find, but it's humorous, or something that just happened out of the ordinary. But thinking back, there were some calls that happened when I was newer to the road. It was my first probably 3-4 years on. The stories are kind of from my memory. I didn't go back. I wouldn't even know how to find the reports to read them. And they're things that I'll always remember. I always tell people, they ask, like, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with these calls when you go to them? And everyone's different. I've noticed over the years that I kind of get into this checklist mode, I guess is the best way to put it, where you get on scene, you go into, okay, make the scene safe, preserve evidence, call additional units, and you just get into the investigation. And part of that is training, part of it is probably just mindset. I have to believe it's maybe partly a defense mechanism mentally too, just to get into that work mode. I don't want to say robot mode because it implies that I don't care. That's not it. I do care, but it's basically, all right, I'm here, there's this problem that I have to investigate, or this incident, and now what do I got to do first? What next? What next? My response has been different than, I don't want to say most, because it's not like I took a poll or anything, but it's been different from others. When I first got into law enforcement, I was really genuinely concerned about, what am I going to do if I see a dead body? What am I going to do if I see this or that, and how is it going to affect me? And even I think my family was concerned about it. I distinctly remember going to my first fatal crash. I was in field training at Vilas, and my field training officer said, you need to go up and look in the car, and the body was still in the car, and I didn't want to. I was hesitant because that was kind of the first time. And he said, no, you're doing it because I want you to do it now. When we're with you, then the first time it happens at 3 in the morning and you're by yourself in the middle of nowhere. I went up there, looked at the car, the damage, the body. I can picture it in my head, but that was kind of it after that. Then it became, okay, what needs to happen next? And that kind of has set the tone for things afterwards. There's hesitancy of how things are going to happen, And then when I'm in that situation, it just becomes a work mode. One of those examples, and part of this too behind the call is, I think community has an idea that when we go to calls, we have a bunch of information on what's going on. Our dispatch center does a great job of trying to get the information they can get, but it's an imperfect world, and we're getting information from people that are going through trauma, or they're drunk or high or whatever, or language barriers or whatever it is, but sometimes we go to calls with very little information or a lot of incorrect information. On this first particular call that I'm talking about, I got sent to an address on the southwest side. I was told there was a language barrier. They didn't know much. There was something about an ambulance, and they sent me and another officer to go there, kind of figure it out before the ambulance gets there. So I was the first officer on scene. I responded lights and sirens because they needed an ambulance, so it sensed we needed an emergency, but there wasn't like this running up to the house or anything. It was still trying to figure out what the heck was going on because I had no information. The address we were going to was an upstairs apartment, and the entrance was around the back side. So as I'm walking to the back of the house, I'm met by somebody who doesn't speak really any English at all. About the most I got was something about a knife. That was really it. Things took a different turn at that point because now I'm, okay, is there somebody threatening somebody with a knife? Is there somebody stabbed? I don't know. Went up the stairs. The door to the apartment was slightly open, and it opened into a kitchen area and then further into the apartment and went to a hallway and some bedrooms. And in the kitchen area, I saw a sight I was not prepared for. There was a male and a female. They were in the middle of the kitchen on the floor, and it was almost like they were hugging or holding each other up. They were kind of sitting. When they saw me open the door, mentally in my head, I can picture this. They seemed to like slump, and the female fell back to the floor, and the male also did, kind of separate ways. They were covered in blood from head to toe. The floor of the kitchen, it looked like somebody dumped a bag of blood on the floor and then just rolled around in it. There was like scuff marks and movement marks all over the place. In my head, I remember thinking it looked like somebody took the knife drawer out of the kitchen and dumped it onto the ground. There were just knives everywhere. I couldn't tell what injuries were there. There was one obvious one. The female had a butcher knife in her chest, and the handle and about an inch of the blade was sticking out, and it was right centered in her chest. And that was really the only obvious injury that I saw, but again, they were so covered in blood that it was impossible to tell anything else without a closer examination, which we can't do until we can make sure there's no other threats in the building. I remember standing there and watching that knife in her chest move with the beating of her heart. That's how close it was to her heart. Obviously, they're not going to remove that. They're going to bandage that in place, and they were transported very quickly. There's nobody at the house there that we could talk to. The one person I did meet didn't speak English, and it was just a very weird call because it's very serious. As it turned out, they had both been stabbed numerous times. From my side of the investigation, I cleared a house and got the ambulance in there. It's my understanding both survived. That was the first time I went to a call with that kind of injury. To date, that had been the worst I had seen. And afterwards, just like the other calls, it was kind of like you get done, you get ready to leave, and you stop and you think about it. And my reaction was always kind of like, wow, that just happened. That was just a real bad example of unfortunately just walking into something that you really were not prepared to walk in for mentally, because I had no information. Again, it was earlier on in my career, I was still on patrol. It was a neighbor calling about somebody in their neighborhood driving a car in their driveway and smashing it into another car. It sounded like a ongoing, pretty involved domestic, but really third-party information, not a lot of specifics. Standard procedure is you kind of get there and you wait for the officer, and then you go as a two-officer call and make contact. Well, I was parked close enough where I could hear screaming come from the house. There was obviously something significant occurring within the house. So I radioed dispatch and I said, hey, there's yelling going on inside. I'm going to go make contact, make sure my backup officer knows that they're going to have to keep going a little quicker and I'm going to be in the house. As I walk up onto the porch, I'm met by a female. She said something to the effect of, please don't shoot him. You know, that changes things really quick when she's asking me not to shoot somebody. And I look into the front door and it's a living room, and I see in the living room there was several juveniles in there. And past the living room is a kitchen, and in the kitchen was a male holding 2 large butcher knives, and he's screaming. At some point during my interaction, I realized he was intoxicated, but at that point, I didn't. I just knew that there was a guy standing in a kitchen with 2 butcher knives screaming, and I had several juveniles in between me and him inside the house. So first thing I do is I tell everyone, get out of the house. They get out, they go on the front porch. I take a couple steps in the house. I have my gun out and I'm talking, and I'm just trying to figure out what the heck is going on, because I still don't know much. I know this guy's mad. I know he's got 2 butcher knives. That's really all I know. He was kind of pacing back and forth, back and forth. He would take a couple steps towards me, he would take a couple steps back, and as I'm talking to him, I had made a mental note, like, okay, if he passes this point, I'm shooting him, because if he still has those knives in his hands, because that's about as close as I can let him get. He was already maybe 15 feet, which is close enough. That line in my head where if he crossed, I was going to be pulling the trigger if he still had those knives in his hands. And at one point specifically, I remember he was approaching that line. He was coming, screaming at me, still knives in his hands. He was getting there. What I would have expected, kind of a near panic moment for that, was entirely the opposite. Although I did not want to shoot somebody, but I had already decided that if he got closer, that would be too much of a danger for me and for the people outside. It was almost like mentally he heard me or something, because the second I kind of came to terms with, like, yeah, this guy's gonna be passing that and I'm gonna have to use deadly force, he backed up. And he never got that close again, but it was, I thought about that since then. It's just what a weird feeling it was. Yeah, this is gonna happen. And that was my thought process. One was Officer Pao Yang, who's retired now. Pao had his taser out, and I still had my pistol out, and Pao's talking to him, and he's not really calming down too much. Bill Taylor, who is also not with the department anymore, he has retired. But he went, for some reason, to the back door of this place, and he goes and he makes noise at the door, and the intoxicated guy with the knife hears it, turns and moves the drapes. The guy with the knives yelling at Bill, Bill's yelling at the guy with the knives, and everyone's yelling over each other. But thankfully, Pao took this moment when the guy didn't have attention on us he tased him, and it was a good taser hit, and he fell to the floor. And so I run up to go get him handcuffed. We got him in custody. Nobody got hurt. It wasn't domestic, and he was intoxicated. He was arrested for a number of things. Our patrol officers go to domestics several times a day. In most cases, they're nonviolent. This was one of those where we got third-party information. The information was very limited, and then I show up, and next thing I know, I'm face-to-face with a guy with 2 butcher knives. We made it through, though. And again, that was another one where it was like, guy goes off to jail. He was still screaming, and you're done with things, and you're like, well, that just happened. Let's go do evidence and a report now. Work goes on. Calls continue. You talk about it with your work buddies. Maybe you talk about it with family or wife or something like that. At that time, and still, I don't really discuss a lot of that stuff with my wife. Sometimes I do. I don't want her to worry about stuff she doesn't need to worry about. We'll title it When I Could Be a Hero to My Son, I guess, because that's what cracks me up most about it. My son was young when this occurred. He was probably 5 or 6, and he would regularly ask me, Dad, did you catch any robbers today? Dad, did you catch any robbers today? And I would say, no robbers, no robbers. So one day, we get a call that the bank over at County Market had been robbed, had been held up at gunpoint. Giant response over there. We're looking everywhere for the suspect. We got a rough description. Suspect had a pistol with what they believe was a silencer. Detectives are over there doing their thing. I'm in the drug unit at this time, so I'm plain clothes. We're driving around on my cars, checking areas. We're checking everywhere we could think of to find this person. Through the description and other information given, that we have a suspect already. It's maybe an hour or two into this, probably not even two. Me and other members of the community resource unit were tasked with taking a photo of our suspect and going to the local hotels and trying to figure out if that person was staying there. We always there were several places we stopped where people would be like, yeah, he was staying here, but he's not anymore. It was last week. And we were in Rothschild, and I believe it was a Rothschild officer that ended up finding the suspect vehicle. So we take all of our unmarks and we set up on it. And we're just kind of hoping he comes back. And we can, at that time, we were our suspect was rock solid. So we were going to arrest him. I figured he either dumped the car or he was staying at one of the hotels around. And we hadn't gotten to Stony Creek yet, and I'm thinking, well, if he robbed a bank, he hasn't had a house, he's going to go to a nice hotel. I walk across to the bar, and I had taken off my vest and my pistol and everything. I had a backup hidden pistol with me, but that was really it, and a neck badge. I walk into the bar, and as I clear the doors, there's the guy right there. He's sitting at a table with another female. And I just got that shiver down I just got it again, because I could picture it. I got that shiver down my back, and I'm like, oh, I got you. And I walk right past him, and I go to the bar, and I ordered something just to make it seem like I was there for a lunch or something like that. And I get on my phone. At that time, we had these like $10 flip phones. So I called Bill Kolb, and I said, yeah, he's in here. And I remember him thinking, like, he is? You know, Bill almost didn't believe me at first. And I said, yeah, get the guys together, I'll keep eyes on him, and then come in and we can arrest him. So I'm waiting for kind of the signal that they're coming, and as I'm waiting, I see a taxi pull up in the front, and as it pulls up, I can see they start gathering their stuff, and I think, oh, they're getting in this taxi. So I call up Bill, and I said, you need to go now. They're getting in the taxi, and we don't want to let them go mobile if he's going to take this taxi driver hostage or something like that. Like, we need to box this car in so they don't get going. At this point, they're kind of starting to get their stuff in the taxi, get in. I get to the front doors, and I'm staying back a little bit, but I'm still close enough where I can keep an eye on them and what's going on. As soon as I see the unmarked come up with our arrest team, they come up right behind the taxi, block the taxi in, I come running out. Both get pulled out of the car without incident, both get arrested. The suspect had what turned out to be an airsoft pistol, exactly what was pictured in the bank robbery that he was holding, and all but a couple $100 of the cash that he stole out of the bank was in his backpack. And I remember him making some comment like, wow, you guys are quick, you guys are super quick. But the best part of that story was I came home, and it was just like, I saw my son, and I was like, what are you going to ask me today? At first he didn't know what I was talking about, and I just wanted to ask me, did you catch any robbers today? So I could say yes, because I just thought it was funny, because he at that time he was just asking me every day, did you catch any robbers? Did you catch any robbers? And I finally was able to say yes. Well, I did ask that question, like, am I broken? Is there something wrong with me that I don't have the same emotional response as others do? Because quite honestly, when going to these calls where other officers are having a hard time dealing with it, justifiably, I mean, they're calls that most people would struggle with, and then I don't. Like, that bothered me more than the call itself, that it didn't bother me, if that makes any sense. And that even extends into, private life. I've recently had grandparents pass away in the last couple of years, and I was actually scared that my family would think that I didn't care that my grandparents passed away, and that bothered me as well, because I cared greatly. I miss them, and I will always miss them. But my response was the same as it was here. I found out they passed away, and in my head, I'm going into this checklist. Okay, funeral. What needs to be done? There are things that I know that affect me profoundly. Things that I don't even know that I would be able to handle, like losing one of my kids, losing my wife. Those are things that there's no doubt in my mind that I would struggle greatly with. But things that I worried about before, I don't I've learned about myself and how I react to those things. And I've also, just through 20 years in law enforcement and maybe maturity or immaturity, dark humor sometimes rears its ugly head. I've just learned that I don't have the same response as other people with those things. It's not necessarily bad. I don't know that it's necessarily good either. Like, from the outside looking in, me talking about numbing those emotions and not being affected like that, people would think, well, that's good, right? Well, there's a flip side to that coin. Things that I really enjoyed, and I still enjoy, I've noticed I don't enjoy as much, if that makes any sense. Like, I still really like it. I enjoy doing it, but it's different. The joy is different. I suspect that when your mind kind of develops ways to cope with things like this, it isn't able to just be like, okay, well, in this small area, we're just going to cope with it. I suspect it's probably in a broader scale. I don't want anyone to think that is in law enforcement that goes to something and they do struggle with it, that there's anything wrong with that. It's just everybody deals with things a little differently. And it is a question that I've asked myself several times, like, why do I handle this differently? And I know there's a lot of possibilities. I don't know that I'll ever know the answer to it. One of the biggest things that I really enjoy, especially about being a detective, which is why I wanted to be a detective, is because I like the puzzle part of things. Every once in a while I get a case, and one comes to mind where it was handed to me basically like, yeah, there's nothing to go on. That one, through just a series of just tiny pieces of information that I was able to stack on to other pieces of information, and next thing I know, I've 2 arrests out of it, and I had a rock solid case on that too. Getting handed a case going, do what you can. And to me, that's the fun part of it, is looking at all those little pieces of information, and all of a sudden just some easily overlooked piece of information that you kind of look at just sends you down this road where everything all fits, and I really, really enjoy that. Advice to a new officer would be, get used to being uncomfortable. Get out of your wheelhouse, get out of your comfort zone. It was a struggle for me at first. Every time that I'd have to try something new in terms of an investigation, if you push yourself out of your wheelhouse, number one, it's going to make you a better officer, make you more comfortable. That's probably the biggest thing, is be willing to get outside of your wheelhouse, outside of your comfort zone. If you make a mistake while you're outside your wheelhouse, don't let that derail you in that mission. Like, learn from it, fix it, do better next time.